This video is an idea of a video. Well, I originally wanted to do a video on the false heretical SDA doctrine on Jesus in the heavenly sanctuary and take a unique perspective on that. But as I was gathering material for that video, I knew I had to first discuss and refute the Adventist doctrine of the physical heavenly sanctuary. I look at this video here and look at this graphic as biblical disinfectant. I look at these videos that I do which define and show Greek and Hebrew words which really then defeat Adventism, and I view them as helping former Adventists in terms of this spiritual disinfectant. We're going to spray here on Ellen White and Adventism in general. So the refutation of this physical sanctuary was of such content, you're going to see all these books. And it took me a lot of research, that it's going to be one long video. I recognize it's a long video, but again, this is spiritual disinfectant for Adventism. Now, following this video is going to be that video I originally set out to do, which is kind of a unique perspective on investigative judgment. Jesus got some also unique perspectives here that I don't think have been previously discussed in terms of heretical Adventist doctrine and their physical temple. By the way, I want you to know this. In here, I'm going to go through, I got a lot of books. You can see them stacked up here. Many of these are Greek and English lexicons and exegetical dictionaries of the Greek language. I have no idea what I'm going to find when I embark on these studies that I do. Just don't. I let the data lead me where I go. And again, you're going to see it all refutes Adventism. So, and that's what you're going to see here when we go through all of these books. Now, it's important, I think, first to start with what Adventists believe about their earthly and heavenly sanctuary. Adventism believes, and you're going to see, that the heavenly sanctuary is just a copy of the earthly sanctuary. A copy. This is important because the earthly sanctuary, right, is compared in Adventist literature. They use the type, anti-type. It's frequent in Adventist literature. Type, anti-type, copies of the true, etc. You're going to see all that. This really infantile Adventist theology limits their type, anti-type usage to just the Day of Atonement. That's pretty much what Adventists do. This whole type, anti-type, they just focus on Leviticus 16, the Day of Atonement, and this one part of the heavenly sanctuary. The type, anti-type comparison really should encompass the whole sanctuary. Should it not? But Adventists typically limit, not all the time, and you're going to see here, they typically limit to just the atonement function and just one part of the sanctuary, when they should do it to all of it. Now, I'm just going to give you two examples, quotes from Ministry Magazine, illustrating the Adventist type, anti-type, where they actually mention the whole sanctuary. So let's look here. You can see in 1934, our high priest Jesus is in the ministry of the sanctuary in heaven, which is the anti-type. So they're comparing whole sanctuary, type, anti-type. 1942, in other words, the tabernacle, in which was a miniature counterpart of the tabernacle, and type, anti-type. So it's the whole sanctuary they're comparing it to. Now, this Adventist sanctuary comparisons, they're type, anti-type. They're often limited, like I said, just to the Day of Atonement, not the entire sanctuary. Here's what I found when I was doing all this research. Early Adventist theology was not as sophisticated as today's Adventist theology. In early Adventist theology, it really was unclear if Adventist heaven, as they conceived it in their sanctuary, was it really just this sanctuary in heaven? Was heaven a two-compartment sanctuary? And that is the confines of heaven. Or is heaven this wild vastness which we can't comprehend, but it also has a sanctuary inside of heaven? That sophistication does not exist in early Adventist theology. Of course, it exists now. You're going to see a 1976 Ministry Magazine. It's going to make the clear statement that heaven is not the sanctuary, but heaven is a place which contains a sanctuary. Here's what I've seen. Every non-Christian religion that I've studied shows this same trend. That their early theology is vague and unclear. But as the years progress, their theology gets corrected, adjusted, clarified. And that's what we're going to see here with this whole sanctuary mess. So let's begin and explore the sanctuary teachings. There's no better place to begin than with Ellen White, which is the top of my stack here. Then we're going to move to the 1976 Ministry magazine that I mentioned, which has a very interesting aspect of the sanctuary. And finally, to the great controversy in the 28 Beliefs books. Stay with me. This is a long video. I do have a bonus at the end, but let's begin here with Ellen White. Well, actually, before we start with Ellen White, let me say this. I stopped the video right here because I heard someone knocking at the door. You may have heard it in the video. Guess what just happened to me? I had 2 Jehovah's Witnesses at my door. So I just went to the door and talked with them. They could see that I was dressed up, and they said, "You're busy." I said, "Yeah, I'm busy, but do come back." So I'm going to have a future meeting with some Jehovah's Witnesses, and that'll be fantastic. But anyway, off to Ellen White. We're going to start here. Here's my original Spiritual Gifts, 1864, and let's investigate what she says about the sanctuary. Look with me here. So here's that same Spiritual Gifts, Volume 4, original edition. I love it. I got this from Lisa Autumn Books way back in the day. So let's look at what Ellen White said here on page 113. It's a most splendid sanctuary has been made, according to the pattern showed to Moses in the mount and afterward presented to David. Okay? Not real clear, a little vague, but she clearly thinks it's the same. Well, she says it again here. Look what the Great Controversy, 1888 edition, and on page 413 she says this, a little clearer now. The sanctuary in heaven in which Jesus ministers in our behalf is the great original of which the sanctuary built by Moses was a copy. There it is, original, copy. They are like the same. She says darn near the same thing in this compilation they put out here, The Story of Redemption in 1947, where she says exactly the same thing, but you just saw in the Great Controversy, but adds to it here on page 377. The sanctuary in heaven in which Jesus ministers in our behalf is the great original, with the sanctuary built by Moses was a copy. We just read that. Then, as the sanctuary on earth had 2 compartments, the holy and most holy, so there are also 2 holy places in the sanctuary in heaven. Remember that, by the way. So in Ellen White's theological view, the sanctuary in heaven has 2 compartments. Interesting. Now we're going to go to that 1976 special edition Ministry magazine I mentioned, which, remember what I said, I've noticed this in all my false religions, the theology gets a little more sophisticated as the years go on, and we're going to see it here. Likewise, heaven is the general locale as a whole within which there is a designated sanctuary with 2 compartments. So there we go. We got finally some clarification that heaven itself is not a sanctuary, but heaven has a sanctuary. Let's keep reading down the page here. In the upper heaven, far above the earth and the heavens, that will be shaken by God, is that heavenly world, heavens, in which there is reality of the heavenly Jerusalem with its real sanctuary. As the earthly copy, it has 2 compartments. See, here we are again with that theological view carried forward from Ellen White. One is merely a copy of the other. We're going to finish 76 Ministry magazine here. It is also in harmony with the other biblical passages that describe a real sanctuary with 2 compartments in heaven. There it is again, following Ellen White. We have a sanctuary in heaven with 2 compartments. Now let's go to modern day. 28 Beliefs, book I use all the time, copyright 2018. Sanctuary in heaven. So here's what Adventists say. Follow me with the red text. The sanctuary is the true tabernacle in which the Lord erected, not man. Hebrews 8, 1 and 2, which I'm going to address in this video. At Mount Sinai, Moses was shown the pattern, copy, or miniature model. See, there it is again. They think the 2 are the same. And then they cite, of course, Exodus 25, 9, which I will cite too. Scripture calls the sanctuary he built, there it is, copies of the things in heaven. Copies of the true, Hebrews 9, 23 and 24, which I will address in this video. Throughout, Scripture premises the existence of a heavenly sanctuary or temple. They cite some verses. In vision, John the Revelator saw the heavenly sanctuary. He described it as a temple of the tabernacle in heaven. Revelation 15:5 in the temple of God. Revelation 11:19. Matter of fact, I'm going to look at the Greek word in Revelation 15:5 and 11:19. So let's continue what the Adventists say about the sanctuary on the next page. It is clear, therefore, that the Scriptures present the heavenly sanctuary as a real place. And so use Hebrews 8:2, which I am going to go to great detail on. Not a metaphor or abstraction. Read this purple text. Commit this to memory. The heavenly sanctuary is the primary dwelling place of God. So we have a heavenly sanctuary within the confines of heaven, and in that heavenly sanctuary is the dwelling place of God. So says the 28 Beliefs book. Let's do a summary here of what we've so far learned from SDA beliefs. The earthly and heavenly sanctuaries are copies of each other. It's according to the pattern, spiritual gifts. It's the original versus the copy, language used in the Great Controversy. It is a earthly copy with two compartments, 1976 Ministry Magazine. It's copies of the true, that's the 28 Beliefs book. The heavenly sanctuary is the primary dwelling place of God, 28 Beliefs. Now, are the SDA right? Is the sanctuary in heaven a copy of the earthly and divided into two compartments? Now, before moving on to address the Adventist wrong citations of the scriptures that I told you I was going to address, we just read there's a heavenly sanctuary and it has two compartments. Story of Redemption, 1976 Ministry Magazine. How do Adventists want their readers to understand this article in, let's say, Ministry Magazine? Early Adventist literature, not clear whether the entire heaven was the sanctuary or heaven and its vastness contains a sanctuary in it somewhere. Not clear. In either case, where is the Adventist God right now? Because I'm going to make a distinction. The Adventist Jesus and Adventist God are not Christian Jesus or Christian God. So the Adventist God, where's this Adventist God? If the heavenly sanctuary is to function in form and type as the earthly sanctuary, God said, what did God say? God said that he will dwell in the sanctuary. Look with me here. Exodus 25:8, and let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell in their midst. And what did the 28 Beliefs book say? The heavenly sanctuary is the primary dwelling place of God. Well, you know what that means? God is in a 15 by 15 foot box. There it is. Seventh-day Adventist, God is in a box, dwelling in the sanctuary within him. So God can't get out of this box, and even according to Seventh-day Adventism. So not only have Seventh-day Adventists put their God in a 15 by 15 foot room, their theology is just extended to ridiculous conclusions. Hey, they said it themselves in 28 Beliefs book. God's dwelling place is the heavenly sanctuary. The heavenly sanctuary is the most holy place, is the 15 by 15 foot room, and that's where God is. Adventist theology, not me. The Adventist sanctuary theology, to me, is just absolutely amateurish. Putting God in a box. Adventists, thank you very much. Then Adventist theology, it doesn't explain or justify or explain why, if investigative judgment Jesus in 1844 moved into the most holy place, did he kick out God? Did he have to evict God? Or is God in the room now in this 15 by 15 foot room of Jesus? They don't explain or tell us this. Why is investigative judgment Jesus in the most holy place by himself? He either evicted God out or they're both there together. Doesn't explain that, does it? So is he sharing the room with them, with God? Hard to tell from Adventist literature. But let's take their literature to another ridiculous conclusion. Look with me here. Revelation 7:9. A great multitude that no one can number from every nation, from all the tribes and people, language, standing before the throne room and before the Lamb. Well, what does Adventist literature tell us? God is in the heavenly sanctuary. God's in a 15 by 15 foot room. Maybe Jesus is there too. And we're going to have a great multitude standing in this 15 by 15 foot room, because that's what Revelation 7:9 says. It's a really crowded room, isn't it? Oh, Adventist theology is absolutely ridiculous. So, the 28 Beliefs addressed some scriptures. And I said the scriptures I'm going to explain. I'm going to go through those right now. I'm going to explain Hebrews 8:1 and 2. Hebrews 9:23 and 24, Revelation 15:5 and 11:19. I'm going to look at all those Greek words. Again, like I said, when I started this, I had no idea what I was going to find. Maybe I was going to find Greek words that substantiate Seventh-day Adventist doctrine or refute it. I'm just going to say, spoiler alert, refutes it in every case. And that's what I found. So let me start with Hebrews 8:1 and 2. Often, and it was cited, you saw it cited in the 28 Beliefs book. To prove the existence of a heavenly sanctuary, let's look at it here and remind ourselves. It is clear, therefore, that the scriptures present the heavenly sanctuary as a real place, not a metaphor or an abstraction. I say this all the time. Adventists, stop reading Bible verses. Please quit. Quit. If you're a faithful Adventist and you're watching this video, stop reading Bible verses. Start reading Bible passages. You will study yourself out of Adventism. Hebrews 8. 8, not Bible verse 2, 3, 4. Hebrews 8 does not teach there is a stone building in heaven that is a copy of the earthly. Just doesn't teach us. Hebrews 8 does teach us that there's a difference between the earthly sanctuary and the heavenly sanctuary. They are not, as Adventists teach, made alike. Copies. Copies of the true. Just doesn't exist. Let's start with Hebrews 8:1. We're going to be bad Adventist. We're going to read the Bible passages. We're not going to read Bible verses. Read with me along here at Hebrews 8:1 and look here. By the way, Hebrews 8:1 is a reference to Psalm 110:1. This has apparently escaped the Seventh-day Adventist scholars. So let's read them here. 8:1. We have such a high priest, one who is seated at the right hand of the throne of majesty in heaven. Psalm 110, which is what it's referencing. The Lord says to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies my footstool. Notice in these two verses, in Psalms and Hebrews, Jesus is seated. He's not standing, because he's waiting for his enemies to become his footstool. Now, Jesus has finished his earthly work. That's when he ascends to heaven. He's now seated and waiting for his enemies to become his footstool. But Adventist fake Jesus is standing. Look with me here. The Adventist sanctuary of a standing Jesus denies both Hebrews 8:1 and Psalm 110:1. Adventist Jesus, why is he standing? Because he's working in the investigative judgment, which is why he is standing. Biblical Jesus is not standing, but rather seated in a place of honor with the Father. That's a problem for Adventists right there, don't you think? Back to Hebrews. Remember, Hebrews 8:2 is one of the verses that Adventists prove that's a physical sanctuary. We're going to read 8:2 in the KJV. Read with me here. And it says what? A minister in the sanctuary. Right? We see that. Now, the question I have to ask myself, and I did ask myself, does this word support the existence? Is this Greek word here teaching me that there's a physical sanctuary in heaven? So we're going to begin right here and look here at the Blue Letter Bible, which, by the way, I only use that just to show you a graphic. Do not click on these words here and think you're getting the meaning of the word sanctuary, because it's tied to Strong's, and Strong's is not a lexicon. Strong's doesn't tell you what the word means. So quit using, being internet scholars, and go buy some lexicons. Those will tell you what the words mean. Blue Letter won't. But I just do that here to show you. So here's the word sanctuary, hagion. There it is. I went to Vines, something Adventists use all the time. And what does Vines tell us about Hebrews 8:2? It's the holy place, the holiest. Look what else it says. There are no separate compartments in the anti-typical and heavenly sanctuary. Didn't we just read in Adventist literature that there were compartments in heaven and a sanctuary? Vines is telling us, it doesn't exist. Matter of fact, the word for sanctuary you just saw excludes the meaning of having two compartments. By the way, you know what the word for sanctuary just taught us there in Vines? Where's Vines at? I think it's this one here. It taught us that God's presence is the sanctuary. Wherever God is, it is the sanctuary. God's not in a box for Christians. God's in a box for Adventists, because he's in a 15 by 15 foot room. Your own book tells us that, Adventist 28 Beliefs. So the Adventists cite this verse to prove that there is a heavenly sanctuary. But the definition of the Greek word doesn't support it. It says, by the way, there are no two compartments. We saw in 1976 Ministry Magazine and Ellen White's book, The Story of Redemption, there's a two-compartment structure in heaven. This book says, no, there's not. The Greek word does not support that. Not only has the Greek proven that the sanctuary in Hebrews 8:2 is not a physical sanctuary divided into compartments, this passage of text further defeats Adventism and its sanctuary doctrine. If Adventists were to keep reading, which they don't because they only read Bible verses, if they were to read Bible passages, they would get down to Hebrews 8:5, where they might learn something. So we're going to be very bad Adventists, and we're going to continue reading and looking at Hebrews 8:5. And it says they serve a copy and shadow of heavenly things. It's talking about the sanctuary, and it describes it as a shadow. What does that mean? There's your Greek word for shadow in Hebrews 8:5. So we are going to have to look at that. So we're going to look at some Greek lexicons, and we're going to learn that shadows, or copies, as the New King James uses, which is what this 28 Beliefs book primarily uses. I looked in the like the preface, and it says it uses the New King James version unless otherwise cited, and that's what they cited, New King James. So does it say copies? Does copies mean copy? We're going to start by looking at this exegetical dictionary right here. This is volume 3 of a 3-volume set. And look what it says here, Hebrews 8:5. And shadow, and it gives us the Greek word for shadow, or pattern mentioned in Exodus 25:40. And it says it points towards the true form. In other words, this word for shadow is not the true form. What you see here circled in yellow, you're going to see here in a minute, because I'm going to go over that Greek word too, because it actually means the exact opposite. So shadow does not mean exact pattern or copy. It is pointing towards the true form. Let's continue reading in this exegetical dictionary and go to the next point. This means that the rites performed in the earthly sanctuary could not and were not intended to effect atonement and forgiveness of sins. So the sanctuary in the earth could not forgive anyone's sins, and did not, because Hebrews 7:19 tell us the law made nothing perfect. But is that what Adventists teach? Let's look at what Adventists teach here. God instructed Moses to build as his earthly dwelling place the first sanctuary that functioned under the Old Testament. This was the place where the people were taught the way of salvation. No, they weren't. Didn't we just read there was no salvation granted in the sanctuary of Moses? But Adventists think there is. See, Adventist teaching is absolutely not biblical. Let's continue in this exegetical dictionary at the bottom. The saving atonement, look at this, has been realized. Has been. Past tense. Doesn't exist now. Investigative judgment Jesus has just gotten fired. Has been realized in the unique and once self-sacrificing of the high priest Jesus, who offered his blood. Jesus died once on the cross for forgiveness of sins. There is no need for Jesus standing up in a sanctuary still working, because his death on the cross forgave us of all of our sins. But let's continue looking at this Greek word here in this theological dictionary of the New Testament. I think it's about a 12-volume set. We're going to look at volume number 7. Here is, again, I'm still on the topic of Hebrews 8:5. And what does this say here? A point worth noting is that this sense occurs, and this sense of this use of the word sanctuary occurs in this whole passage, Hebrews 8:1 to 10:18. And then it goes on to tell us that here's this word translated as shadow, the opposite of the word, and it gives us this Greek word here, which you're going to see in a minute, and it says a quotation from Exodus 25:40, which in turn means the same as, and it gives us this other Greek word, which you already saw circled in yellow in the previous slide. So let me say this. Here's what this is teaching us right here. If the earthly and heavenly sanctuary were copies, then we would see these two Greek words circled in yellow. But we don't. It doesn't mean copy. So what do these two Greek words mean? Let's just look at them real quick. Here's the first one. I used a lexicon here I use all the time. Adventists use it. Lo and nida. Let's look at it right here. Here's the first Greek word. And it means what? For that which has the same form as something else. Remember what I said earlier. The word for shadow is not this word. Previous lexicon we look at that said, well, if this word was used, then it would mean the same form and same likeness. But it's not used. It's shadow. Let's look at the second word that they cited in the theological dictionary that's not there. A visual form, designed to be limited or copied, model, pattern, etc. I just showed you the two Greek words that are not there. That if the sanctuary was a model or pattern, we would see those Greek words, but we don't. It means shadow. Hebrews 8:5 uses shadow, which doesn't mean model, pattern, etc. So again, the Greek is defeating Adventism. We know the Adventist doctrine of the sanctuary wants us to believe the sanctuary models are copies of each other. Ellen White taught that in her 1888 Great Controversy. We just saw in the Greek, the word for shadow doesn't mean model or same form, period. The Greek words for model and same form are not used, but shadow is. A shadow is not a copy. Hebrews 8:2, as cited in the 28 Beliefs book, to prove there's a physical temple in heaven, has just been defeated. Let's move on to the next one, Hebrews 9:23 and 9:24. Let's remind ourselves, here's how they used 9:23 and 24. Scripture calls the sanctuary he built copies of the things in heaven, and its holy places copies of the true. The Adventists want us to believe once again that copies means, as they have previously taught, and we've seen in their literature, that the heavenly sanctuary is a copy of the earthly and vice versa. So does copies, as used in Hebrews 9:23, mean a copy? I mean, if you just read the English New King James as we did, it certainly appears to. But does it. So let's look at it right here. There it is. New King James, copies of the true. And here it is in this rendering on Blue Letter Bible. It doesn't use copies of the true, it uses patterns. But there is the Greek word. So let's look at the lexicon for it here. In Hebrews 8:5, oh, there's 8:5 again, right? And 9:23, it refers to a kind of shadowy copy of heavenly things. So it's not an exact copy, it's a shadowy copy. Let's look at this Greek English lexicon by Art and Gingrich, which Adventists use all the time, and let's see how it defines Hebrews 9:23. You know what it defines it as? It's an outline, it's a sketch, it's a symbol. It's not a pattern, it's not a copy, it's an outline, a sketch, a symbol. It's a shadow, as in you go outside and you cast your shadow on the ground. It's not an exact replica of you. It's an outline, it's a sketch, it's a symbol. It's not the same thing, not even close. And that's the intent of this word. So as Adventists cite Hebrews 9:23 to prove there's a heavenly sanctuary, the actual Greek word says no, it's an outline, it's a sketch, it's a symbol. It's not an exact copy. So the Adventists cite copies, as they do in their 28 Belief book, to the reader to try to get them to believe something actually that is not true. But the Greek does not support Adventist doctrine. It never supports Adventist doctrine. Thus far, not a single Greek word has supported the existence of a physical sanctuary. Let's move to the last two I'm going to look at. Revelation 11:19 and 15:5. The same Greek word occurs in both these verses. So the same applies, and that's how I approached it. I looked at 11:19 and 15:5, and I say, look, I'm going to look at these Greek words. Do these Greek words support the Adventist doctrine of a physical sanctuary in heaven? Let's look at those Greek words right here. And there they are right there. You can see the 11:19, 15:5, same Greek word for temple. And we're going to go right back to Art and Gingrich. And what's it say? It's a heavenly sanctuary. And there's 11:19, 15:5. And what's it say? Yet there will be no temple in the New Jerusalem. God in person is the sanctuary of the eternal city. Didn't I say that earlier? Where God is the sanctuary. God doesn't dwell in a sanctuary. And I like this Greek English lexicon by Art and Gingrich because they cite Revelation 21:22. Let's look at it here. And I saw no temple therein, for the Lord Almighty and the Lamb are the temple, and they are in it. Let's look at this one here. This is my first introduction to my video series of Moises Silva Exegetical Dictionary. I love what he says. He starts on page 370, and there's the word for temple that we just looked at for Revelation 15:5 and 11:19. And he goes 4 pages later, and we're going to look at what we see here 4 pages later. The Apocalypse speaks often of the heavenly temple, cites all those verses. Clearly, and it says it does this on the basis of Psalm 11:4. Yet in Revelation 21:22, it's expressly stated, in the New Jerusalem there will no longer be a temple, since God himself will be the temple for our community. That's like the 3rd time I said this now. Where God is, that is where the temple is. God's dwelling place is now among his people. Let's look at Psalm 11:4. Psalm 11:4 proves the Lord is in his holy temple. The Lord's throne is in heaven. This verse, by the way, Psalm 11:4 is teaching wherever God is, the presence of God is the holy place, is his throne, is his temple, is his place. That's what Psalm 11:4 is teaching. If there is a temple in heaven that functions in the same manner as the earthly temple, Adventism, then you just placed your God in a box. You already have. This book here tells us God's dwelling place is the heavenly sanctuary. The heavenly sanctuary is a building within heaven, and God is in the most holy place. God is in a box. Welcome to Adventist theology. He's confined. God is confined. I think our prisoners here in California in Folsom Prison have more room than God does in his 15 by 15 foot room, because that room doesn't have any windows in it. Prisoners, they may get to go outside once every day. Not in Adventist theology. God's stuck in a box. So the heavenly temple, that is supposed to be the function in the same form and type as Adventists teach of the earthly, demands that God be confined to a box, as they teach in 28 Beliefs. Adventist theology really now is here's something as I think about it, it's really unclear if this is a shared space with Adventist Jesus. So is Adventist Jesus, did he kick God out of the most holy place, where they said God resides in the sanctuary of the most holy place? So did Adventist Jesus evict God? Say, you got to get out of here. I got to stand up and I got to work, even though I'm supposed to be seated at the right hand of the throne, waiting for my enemies to become my footstool. So did he evict God, or now are they both there? Adventist Jesus doesn't tell us that. Adventist theology doesn't tell us that. Look at this graphic here. Most holy place, 15 by 15 foot room. God is confined in a box. The Adventist God is stuck in this room, no windows. We still don't know if Adventist Jesus is there or not. And the curtain of the temple, is it torn or untorn? They don't tell us. This Adventist theology is a joke. Now, I know it's been a long video. If you stuck with me this far, here's that promise bonus I told you was coming. Is there anything new under the sun? Ecclesiastics, right? You read that. Of course not. The Adventist doctrine of a physical sanctuary existing in heaven, of the same form and function and type as an earthly sanctuary, that is an old and already existing idea that I discovered as I was doing research and reading the book of Hebrews. A Hebrew scholar mentioned what I'm about to share with you. So the heresies of Adventism, they're not new or novel or Christian. They already existed in some manner in the past, as this one does. So where did the idea of a physical sanctuary and buildings existing in both in heaven and earth, where did that come from? Look here. It came from Plato. Yes, Plato, Greek philosophy. Adventism is nothing more than Greek philosophy. Plato lived, as you see, about 400 years before Christ. Plato developed something he called the theory of forms, in which he believed and he taught, and you're going to see, that there were identical structures in heaven and identical structures on earth. Now, I'm going to show you a piece from the works of Plato. He's going to have a discussion between someone called Timaeus, which is Plato. He's assuming the role of Timaeus. And Timaeus is talking and teaching Socrates. And he's going to teach Socrates his theory of forms. So look with me here. This is my source, Plato's Complete Works. And here is the discussion between Timaeus and Socrates. And when he's speaking of the craftsman here, that you see here in the first sentence, he's speaking of God, the Creator. So whenever the craftsman looks at what is always changeless and using a thing of that kind as his model, there's the theory of forms, reproduces its form and character then of necessity, all that he is so completes is beautiful. So this is the beginning of the theory of forms and the creation of duplicate structures both in heaven and on earth. It gets more clear here on the next one. Let's look at this. Further, we maintain that necessity, that which comes to must come to be by the agency of some cause. So Plato is arguing for the creator God here, right? There's our cause. Next set of underlines. Now he's asking, which of the two models did the maker use when he fashioned it? Did God use the heavenly model first and then replicate it on earth? Or did God create it on earth and then replicate it in heaven? Because he believes they're both the same, but which one did he use? Then he tells us. Then clearly, he looked at the eternal model. Okay, so God created in heaven first, replicated it on earth. Now surely it's clear that to all, that it was the eternal model he looked at, for of all the things that we have come to us to be, our universe is most beautiful, etc. So there you go. It's Greek philosophy and Adventism. That's where this idea came from. Adventism is simply Greek philosophy in its belief of a physical structure in heaven of the same form, type, and function as there is one on earth. Adventism is Greek philosophy, Platonic philosophy. Whew. Long video, I understand. Let me sum it up here. I looked at 4 Adventist proof texts. Hebrews 8:1 and 2, Hebrews 9:23 and 24, Revelation 11:19 and 15:5. In each case, the Greek words do not support the Adventist doctrine of a sanctuary, which is the same copy, type, form, and function as an earthly one. Doesn't exist. The Greek teaches that God's presence is the true sanctuary. Matter of fact, the Old Testament teaches wherever God is, that's where the sanctuary is. You even saw it in the Old Testament in Psalm 11:4. God is not confined, like he is in Adventist theology, to a 15 by 15 foot room, which they teach here in this silly book called the 28 Beliefs. God is not confined to a box, maybe renting a room with Adventist Jesus dressed as the Levitical priest, or perhaps Levitical priest Jesus kicked God out of the box because he had to step inside the box. Biblical Jesus is seated at the right hand, which is a place of honor to God. He's seated. Adventist Jesus is standing and still working. Two completely different Jesuses. Adventism and its physical sanctuary in heaven has just been defeated, and Adventist Jesus and Adventist God are not true gods, are not true Christ, and have also been defeated.